Welcome everybody to another historic Gangland Chicago video. I am on Lincoln Avenue here in downtown Chicago, and I'm across the street where the events of July 22nd, 1934 took place here at the historic Biograph Theater when J. Edgar Hoover, the chief of the FBI's declared #1 public enemy, John Dillinger, was gunned down. And we're going to be talking about the events of that particular day. Oh, here it is, the infamous Biograph Theater. And remember, in the 1930s, there was very primitive air conditioning at that time, and a lot of people, to escape the heat of Chicago summers, would flock to these theaters, and this place was packed on July 22nd of 1934. Now, what's interesting is that the FBI had already been tracking leads about John Dillinger's whereabouts, and of course John Dillinger was the most notorious bank robber of the 1930s, having robbed over something on the order of 24 banks. He'd also been charged with the shooting death of a South Chicago, Indiana policeman. The bullet penetrated his bulletproof vest, although there was some debate about whether he really was the one that actually killed him. In any event, J. Edgar Hoover, the chief of the FBI, declared him public enemy #1. And they tracked him to this location, reason being because they had received a tip from a house of prostitution madam, a Romanian woman who the FBI threatened with deportation if she didn't cooperate. And she told the FBI where he would be on that July night. And this is where they showed up here, at this location right here. As the theater was letting out, the FBI had to be very careful because there was a large crowd here, and they had to be very careful that innocent people weren't shot if there was an exchange of gunfire. And Dillinger, of course, carried a 1908 Colt firearm, and he drew that to fire it. And the Melvin Purvis, who was the FBI agent who actually shot John Dillinger, there were other FBI agents there too, and in the shooting that ensued, 2 women bystanders were also injured in that encounter. So there's the famous location. And we can talk about how the actual gunning down occurred, because it was very controversial what actually occurred. Make our way safely across the street here. We'll take a look at the Biograph here. It's now called the Victory Garden Theater. On the night of July 22nd, as the patrons were streaming out of this particular theater, Dillinger was spotted amongst the group of people coming out, and Dillinger also spotted some of the FBI agents who were staring a little too hard at him. And as he came out here into the crowd, he bolted to his left, ran here to the left, and he ran down this particular alley right down here, which you really can't see right now. This little walkway between, I think this is a newer building here, but this was a wide alley next to this. And as he was running down the alley and was perceived to be pulling his gun, Melvin Purvis shot him in the back, and that led to a lot of controversy about whether it was a fair takedown or not. J. Edgar Hoover celebrated like crazy in headquarters in Washington, D.C. because Dillinger was public enemy #1. And it was a real feather in his cap. This may or may not be the alley here. I'm not particularly sure. I'm not going to claim it is so, but it is entirely possible that the theater was wider. and that this was the particular alley that he was gunned down in. Anyway, there it is, the historic Biograph Theater. Just another part of Chicago's gangland legacy of violence, particularly in the 1920s and the 1930s. Okay, there it is, the historic Biograph Theater.